In the years straddling 1800, the British working class, even the British lower working class, the richest working class, it was the richest working class that the world had ever seen, anywhere or anywhen, up to that date, at least since the Agrarian Age had set its hold on humanity. In the years straddling 1800, the British working class still spent between 55 and 75% of its income on food. Other working classes at and before that date were in worse shape. They were even closer to, quote, subsistence, unquote. The British working class, as rich as pre-industrial revolution working classes got, still looks to me worse off than your typical gatherer-hunter. And the British working class was up to 3 times as rich as unlucky Agrarian Age populations. Those under the harrow of Malthus's positive check. Those where the population had settled at a level at which women were so skinny that they would no longer reliably ovulate, and children so malnourished that their immune systems were compromised so they could be taken off by the common cold. Rather than, as did Britain in 1800, rather than possessing social institutions that powerfully delayed the age of female first marriage until the middle or late 20s, and which thus could afford to have a higher standard of living without population outrunning the means of subsistence. Why do I think it would have been better to have been a working-class Britain around 1800, or worse, to have been a working-class Britain around 1800, than a gatherer-hunter before 8000 BC? Even though it's better to have been a working-class Britain around 1800 than to have been a typical person almost any place else in the agrarian or even in the commercial revolution age. Well, if you're a hunter-gatherer, you are buff. You do face the risk of lots of within-humanity violence. You do run a substantial risk of being stabbed to death and having to watch your baby's brains be bashed out against rocks. And you do run substantial risks. It's a strenuous life. If the band has to move and you have a broken leg at that time, you're probably not going to survive for long. On the other hand, if you are in the Agrarian Age, well, then you have less of a chance of dying from within humanity violence, unless your lords and masters decide to make an example of you to make sure the taxes are collected on time. But you do have a chance of a long, slow death from starvation and malnutrition, and of watching your children die from same. While you are stunted, weak, with very bad teeth, and quite possibly you are stupid from protein deprivation in utero. I don't think we really know what typical Agrarian Age diets did to brain function. We do know that that Agrarian Age mothers found themselves significantly compromised health-wise as the infant-to-be leaches calcium out of the mother's bones and teeth to build its own. And there is little to choose with respect to life expectancy. Infant mortality appears to be the same among agrarian peasants or craftsmen and gatherer-hunters. Oh, and hunter-gatherers faced interesting lives in which they constantly solved environmental and social puzzles. Sort of a la a slow-motion version of Super Mario. By contrast, the Agrarian Age sees you doing the same damn thing day after day after day, in large part. Plus, the Agrarian Age brings patriarchy and much more wealth and status inequality, which I think is negative sum for humanity as a whole, since there are always many more to be dominated than there are to feel good about themselves because they dominate. Thus, hunter-gatherers look better off to me than the British working class even in 1800, those whom Mill in 1870 saw as living the life of drudgery and imprisonment. That was man's fate, that was the human condition in the Agrarian Age. But then comes escape, somehow. There is escape, but escape comes relatively late. Not until the 1850s was the real wage in England above what it had been in the post-bubonic plague medieval golden age for survivors of the 1400s. But escape does come, and much of this course will be about that escape. When and why it came in different parts of the world and what the consequences were. For now, however, I want you to think about why escape did not come earlier. Between 1600 and 1800, the population of England moves up from 6 to 10 billion, while real wages grow by half. Think of the increase in population that is largely compensated by the fact that Britain was acquiring an empire, and that terms of international trade were moving in Britain's favor, so that the natural resources that Britain could draw on to feed its population and produce grew more or less in tandem with the population between 1600 and 1800. Between the days when Queen Elizabeth's navy was desperately fighting to fend off an invading Spanish army and fleet, and the days when Admiral Lord Nelson was about to destroy the French-Spanish fleets at the Battle of Trafalgar and cement Britain's domination over the seas worldwide. So taking into account the increase in land and natural resources devoted to fueling Britain's economy, and in terms of our index of ideas, that's a rate of increase of about 0.25% per year across 2 centuries in a country that is rapidly becoming the world's industrial leader. But why did it not come earlier? Why was the world before this stuck with 0.1% per year, being the best that pretty much any society could do in terms of ideas invented, developed, and deployed before? That is, there were places that had faster growth, but it turned out to be an investment-driven efflorescence due to imperial peace and to an increasing desire to consume luxuries, which allowed production to grow, while population did not grow as fast. Of course, after 1800, there is the nearly tenfold leap from the English pace of growth between 1600 and 1800 to our day of modern economic growth. And that also really needs explanation, but that comes in later weeks. An obvious place for us humans to have gotten something like Britain's 1600 to 1800 growing before is Rome. The Roman Empire in the years after 1 or 150. There are, of course, other candidates, but Rome is the one I know most about, hence the one I want to focus on. Now, worldwide, we have the axial age, from minus 1000 to the year 1, acceleration in ideas growth. A doubling of the ideas growth rate from the previous Bronze Age, 0.03, to 0.06% per year, and do note how ludicrously low that rate of ideas growth is. 6% a century. We get that in 3 years, and that is the best that Agrarian Age civilization ever did. Just enough technological progress to hold standards of living constant on average worldwide, with a 12% increase in population and a 12% reduction in average farm sizes. And that takes a century. That is the increase you get over a typical century. And yet it was, and was to a great degree, viewed as a marvelous age. And even more marvelous, at the millennium's end comes the rise of the Pax Romana in the Mediterranean, and the Pax Romana spreads beyond, to Scotland, Romania, Central Germany, Austria, and Armenia. It's the largest empire the world had ever seen. One whose elite was interested in public works for urbanization and transport in a way not found in any previous empire. And one, most important, not solely interested in exploiting the empire for the benefit of a ruling city or a ruling caste. Now, don't get me wrong. The rulers of the Roman Empire were interested in exploiting the empire for the benefit of the senatorial and knightly classes, and also for the benefit of the people living in Rome, to the extent that they managed to wield political power themselves, which they did to some degree, late into the empire. But the rulers of the Roman Empire were also interested in turning people, at least people with social power, into Romans. All other empires focused on the elite group. And you could not become an Athenian, you had to be born one. You could not become a Spartan, you had to be born one. You could not become a Persian aristocrat, you had to be born one. By contrast, your grandfather might have been a barbarian fighting the Roman Empire. You are a prosperous landowning knight with substantial commercial issues. Your son may become a senator, and your great-grandson may become an emperor. That was the case with Trajan and Hadrian, coming from southern Spain. That was the case with the Illyrian soldier emperors of the late 200s and so forth. So in the Roman Empire, this desire to incorporate, to make more people into Romans, gives us this mammoth expansion in trade, this mammoth expansion in investment, this mammoth expansion of peace, this simultaneous rise in population, but also in standards of living, in the sense of comfortable conveniences throughout the empire, and luxuries too. You have a greater taste for luxuries, especially for urban living, that holds down population growth. But population growth does continue because investment and productivity are rising with the Roman peace. And it was, people at the time thought, go look at the mid-1st century orator Aelius Aristides' Roman oration, if you don't believe me, or go read Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, its beginning about the age of Antonines. It was viewed as a wonderful time. And then it all goes away. Mediterranean shipping collapses. Rhine Valley construction collapses. Lead atoms from smelters carried into the atmosphere and dropped onto the Greenland ice fall enormously. All gone. And the Pax Romana gone with it. And trade and comfort and the ability to have a high-class bowl and high-class, well-made Aretine tableware if you happen to be living in the shadow of Hadrian's Wall in central England. And the rule of law went. And the ability of low-class people as citizens to have their property and their rights protected by magistrates. Instead of being a Roman citizen and an independent small farmer, you were very well advised, as the Roman Empire collapsed, to voluntarily go and become the serf of some local landlord, ideally a local landlord who either had good friends among the bully boys of the barbarians who were conquering the empire, or was himself a barbarian as well. Now, it could have been different. They were capable of astonishing feats of intellectual creativity and precision metalwork. The Antikythera Mechanism that blows the mind of modern researchers that I'm making you read about, and indeed do please watch the video demonstration of what the Antikythera Mechanism was, we think. An amazing accomplishment, both the astronomy of Hipparchus that it is based on, and the instantiation of Hipparchus's ideas in a precision metalwork device that must have been part of a tradition of such devices, and that was not exceeded until the astronomical clock orreries of the 1400s, 1500s, in Western Europe. Look at the people of ancient classical civilization. In rhetoric and politics, we have Pericles and Demosthenes. In generalship, we have Caesar and Alexander. In governance, we have Augustus and Trajan. In philosophy, we have Aristotle and Zeno. In sculpture, in literature, they are our equals, even though they know much less and do not stand on the shoulders of giants, which are them, in the way that we do. Even in something like making a good living through mass media via presenting yourself as a celebrity. There is Menexerete, daughter of Epicles of Thespiae, called Phryne, because people thought her skin was yellow like that of a toad. And so that was her nickname. Now, in Athens in the minus 300s, that was a compliment. That was the kind of skin you really wanted to have. But Phryne, as making a living via presenting herself as a celebrity, would have had nothing to learn from Kim or Khloe Kardashian. After all, 2,000 years after her death, people were still writing poems about her, assuming that readers will know that she was thought to have been the best life model ever for statues of Aphrodite Venus. They were us, at least those who were not protein deprived in utero, in intelligence, cultural sophistication, and the ability to think. And the Antikythera Mechanism underscores how much they were us in mechanical ingenuity and intellectual creativity. And yet, not. There was no breakthrough. There was no age of commercial revolution with growth at the pace seen between 1500 and 1770 worldwide, let alone 1600 to 1800 in England, that followed Rome's Antonine dynasty, or Iraq's Abbasid dynasty, or the collapse of the Han Empire, or the Athenian Empire, or any of a number of other efflorescences. The imperial peace could not be maintained. The desire for urban living and luxuries could not be maintained. The barbarians or the equivalent came. And we have things that really do look like the collapse of civilization. It was Middle East wide when it happened after 1200 at the end of the Bronze Age. But, Bronze Age technology is still primitive. They couldn't make fires hot enough to melt iron. After the year 1, there seems to be kind of little excuse for the 1500-year delay. What I call the late antiquity of pause. What is called the Dark Age. Now, the standard theory of why ideas growth was so low back in the Agrarian Age is Moses Finley's, which you will read. But there are a host of other historical possible explanations as well, beside Moses Finley's, which was that high income inequality and the importance of domination in creating the living standard of an upper class meant that too great a curiosity about the process of work and too much focus on increasing the productivity of your workers was, as Aristotle said, crude. But then, in addition to the slow growth on average, there is the separate question of why the late antiquity pause. Why didn't whatever kept growth low? And growth was low. Growth was low all the way up to 1500 worldwide, and then it changed. Why the late antiquity pause, and why no earlier breakthroughs? The efflorescences are impressive. So what kept the efflorescence of the Roman Empire from breaking through to commercial revolution scale growth, and then industrial revolution, and then modern economic growth? What kept other efflorescences from breaking through into commercial revolution scale growth? For ultimately, remember, one such efflorescence did. After the bubonic plague of 1346-1348 in Western Europe, there came the Renaissance. And that efflorescence did trigger faster growth. It triggered the age of the commercial imperial revolution, which we will tackle next week. But this week, please focus on Agrarian Near-Stagnation.